Welcome to the Law Firm Growth Podcast, where we share the latest tips, tactics, and strategies for scaling your practice from the top experts in the world of growing law firms. Are you ready to take your practice to the next level? Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. I'm your host as always, Jan Roos, and I'm here with another solo podcast. And this one is going to get super meta. We are going to talk about, I guess the proper term for this would be epistemology, but basically what you can know, what is knowable, and how to make the difference in the various processes that might be taking place in your law firm, in your business at this point in time. So I wanted to bring up a little anecdote of mine that is kind of a bummer. This is something that happened pretty early in, back before I even really started Caseel. This is back when I was a freelancer and I was working on an AdWords campaign with an immigration attorney. And he brought up this point, which really grinded my gears. And he was wondering about the variability of the results because this was marketing. It was a relatively small budget. We got great results some week. We had results that weren't as good the other week. And he brought this thing up. He said, I don't understand why you guys can't just deliver the same thing every single time. Every single time we file an application for a visa, it's 100% certainty. Why can't you do that? And I didn't really have the time to explain it. So I guess this is like a 5-6 year in response kind of a staircase wit sort of thing. But this really all boils down to the theory of knowledge, right? So there's certain things that are knowable, there's certain things that are doable, and there's certain things that are a lot more constrained than others. So I want to take that specific example and map it onto something a little bit more general, just to make it like a little bit more objective. So there's things, and I want to make the distinction between algebra and engineering, right? So without getting into complex stuff like calculus and all that crazy stuff, there's more or less, there's a little bit of leeway in how you might go about solving a problem, right? There's the rules, PEMDAS, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, there's one problem. There's one answer to the problem. It is knowable. You're either objectively right or you're objectively wrong. There's no degrees of variation, right? Now, we can use numbers to do something similar. And this is something that really blew my mind when I kind of figured it out. This was something that really blew my mind when I heard it for the first time. And I was in shop class, and I want to say 10th or 11th grade. And the teacher said, what's the best bridge that you can have? And then a lot of people said, and this is my belief, so the best bridge you can have is the strongest bridge, because you can never, you're never going to worry about it falling down. That's the purpose of a bridge. And he said, the answer is not the strongest bridge. The best engineered bridge is the bridge that's as strong enough to withhold the strain that it will encounter and no stronger, right? So now we're talking about a trade-off, right? Okay, we could make a bridge that was made out of solid diamond that would weigh 10 million pounds, and it would take nothing short of an asteroid hitting the Earth to knock this thing down. But practically speaking, the local governments and the state, federal, whatever, is not going to be pretty well served if it's investing your tax dollars into a 10 million pound bridge that's made out of solid diamond, right? And this is kind of something similar that I see often from the marketing side too. Oh yeah, this is awesome. We want to cover the entire state, and usually it's going to say like Texas or California or something like that. All right, great. What's your budget? Yeah, I think we got about $500, right? So in this case, they're not really staying aware of the trade-offs, right? You can always have more, but at some point there is a process where more comes at the cost of other things too. So this is where things end up kind of getting bridged, because when you talk about the highest level, and I'll bring this back to legal in a sec too, there's, you have certain things like what's the best course of action for winning a trial, right? There are best practices. There's colleges and training programs that teach people how to be persuasive trial attorneys. But if you're talking to Professor A versus Professor B, or trial attorney A versus trial attorney B, they will argue on some of the finer points, but they'll agree with a lot of things as well, right? So we have sort of best practices that exist, but again, they're practices and there's preferences. And to make things even more confusing, the trade-offs may change over time. There's things that may have worked really, really well in the 80s or 90s for whatever reasons in trials that may be completely different with the way that trials are run this year in 2021 when I'm recording this, right? And basically, The truth is, and if I were to go back to the attorney that I was speaking to earlier, the reason why he could get a 100% success rate is because he was dealing with a simple problem. What we were dealing with dealing with potentially thousands of people that were seeing ads and trying to funnel them as best as possible to get to the point where they could engage with that attorney is a lot more different. There's different trade-offs, there's different factors involved. There's a lot of variability in the elements that are concerned, right? So I want to kind of get to this in terms of general operations within, again, the marketing example is usually the first thing that comes to my mind. But as far as delegating processes within your business as well, there's a lot of applications to this. So if you need to teach somebody how to create a file folder for a new client, that is something that's a simple process. It's generally not going to require a lot of oversight. That's something that you can have in an SOP one-to-one, just directions, and then there's going to be a binary pass fail with whether they did that correctly. That's the kind of thing that you can offboard extremely quickly. You probably don't need to have an extremely qualified person to do that. If you do have an extremely qualified person doing that, you're probably, kind of building a diamond bridge there if you want to extend the metaphor from before, right? Similarly, this is also kind of one of those things that you can consider a commodity process. This is the kind of stuff that works really well with a VA and not the kind of thing that you should, really be investing a lot of time, money, or energy into to get absolutely top flight. If it's doable according to the process every single time, that it makes sense. As we kind of get up in the process, when we're going away from something that's simple into something more complex, we generally need a little bit more education, a little bit more background, and either a more talented person to start out with or a more well-developed training process, right? This is something that we've been thinking about a lot. We've been just working on some of the internal training at Casey University around operations. And one of the things that we firmly believe is that, SOPs are great, but SOPs are a jumping off point, right? There's some dark sides to SOPs, which include people that are getting used to SOPs that are expecting an SOP for everything. Now, when you have an SOP that's running into a more complex problem, a lot of times that'll break, right? So we need to make sure that we're understanding the limits of what we can expect out of our people and our processes, right? So what I was trying to get at was we have kind of a trade-off between how much training we do and how much talent we need out of somebody, right? And again, I think this is also sort of a diamond bridge problem. If you need to hire, and this is something that I hear thrown around a lot in kind of management consulting and that kind of talk to, just like, oh yeah, just hire A players. Okay, great. So let me just throw $150,000 in salary at every single position in the business and everything will be peachy, right? Not a realistic solution for a lot of solo law practices, as you can imagine. But I think that there's a trade-off between the amount of training that you put in and the quality of that person. I think you can take somebody who is honest, hardworking, brings their questions to the table and has motivation when you're not in the room. That kind of person, I think you can train to perform as well as somebody who might be more qualified or naturally talented, as long as you're staying on top of them, right? And the real important thing to get people to understand a complex process is feedback. And oftentimes it's not how a process is supposed to be done, but why a process is done that's going to force people to understand the complex decisions that are being made by somebody that's at a little bit higher level, a little bit more experience to them. And this is something I'm going to get into in a later podcast, but there's a lot of research around transferring these sort of things to around stuff like ER nurses and fighter pilots and, Marine Corps squad leaders and stuff like that, where we're balancing extremely complex different challenges with a lot of trade-offs. Like, if you're in the Marine Corps, are we going to get to the objective as fast as possible? Or are we going to make sure nobody gets shot, right? You're balancing those things constantly at all different times. And to understand these things, it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of understanding. And then, frankly, to transfer that expertise is challenging, but not impossible. But again, we need to make sure, and this is kind of the big takeaway from this episode, is we can't treat simple problems like they're complex, and we can't treat complex problems like they're simple. And there's more levels to that. But I will leave it there for you guys. And we will be back next week, probably next 2 weeks, for another solo pod with another episode of the Law Firm Growth Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. For show notes, free resources, and more, head on over to casefuel.com/podcast. Looking forward to catching up on the next episode.